Welcome. This is a recording of information presented during the Kickoff Stakeholder Workshop held on March 14, 2024 for the Blueprint for Safety. The Blueprint for Safety is developing a regional transportation safety action plan for the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, otherwise referred to as CAMPO. I am Lauren Blackburn. I'm serving as the project manager for VHB, leading this project with the CAMPO and the North Carolina Department of Transportation. Following my introduction of safety planning and how the Blueprint for Safety will be developed, another presenter, Ian Hamilton, also with VHB, will summarize crash data analysis shared during the workshop. Jared Draper with Tool Design will introduce concepts for creating a culture of roadway safety, and Jared will present our team's approach for public engagement. We hope this opportunity is a helpful introduction to the Blueprint for Safety. We look forward to working with you and stakeholders throughout this process. Safety planning is a relatively new process for regional planning organizations. I will explain why planning for roadway safety is a critical and timely effort for CAMPO region. We're unfortunately used to seeing images or scenes like this where people were involved in a recent crash, perhaps even one that led to loss of life. We plan for safety because every serious injury or fatality represents a life lost or changed forever. These are preventable outcomes, but it requires the community sees traffic safety as a shared responsibility and to prioritize safe roads and people in all aspects of transportation planning and projects. We plan for safety because in CAMPO, between 2018 and 2022, over 195,000 crashes occurred on regional roadways. More than 2,700 of those crashes seriously injured drivers, passengers, pedestrians, and bicyclists. An additional 654 mothers, fathers, children, brothers, sisters, friends, and loved ones lost their lives due to a roadway crash. Safer roads and people provide opportunities for people to be physically active, be less dependent on driving for regional and local trips, increase local prosperity, and give people of all ages and abilities freedom to move safely in their community. These outcomes are not an accident. Saving lives and preventing tragic injuries are the result of careful planning for how we get around and by prioritizing the safety for all people traveling on roadways and streets above other transportation interests. The USDOT is actively promoting safety planning. USDOT released the National Roadway Safety Strategy outlining the department's comprehensive approach for significantly reducing serious injuries and deaths on our nation's roadways. USDOT is awarding agencies grants for developing comprehensive safety action plans and for implementing projects that work to achieve the goals of these safety plans. The NCDOT Traffic Safety Unit is responsible for overseeing the Highway Safety Improvement Program and updates to the state Strategic Highway Safety Plan, largely resulting in engineering safety projects. The NCDOT Governor's Highway Safety Office oversees updates and implementation of the Highway Safety Plan for complementary non-engineering strategies. CAMPO is responsible for developing many types of transportation plans at the local and regional scale. CAMPO has been at the forefront of many types of transportation plans in North Carolina. Since its inception, CAMPO has developed long-range transportation plans, updating those plans every 5 years to account for new priorities and needs. These plans develop project proposals that are well suited for implementation, especially at the large scale for NCDOT funding. CAMPO has created mode-specific plans such as for bicycling and walking and for congestion management. These address specific needs or modes of travel and often produce proposals that can be implemented by local governments or to address gaps in connectivity or access. CAMPO also has a legacy of crafting sub-area or corridor plans for more carefully analyzing local conditions and developing projects for nearer-term implementation. Each of these plans have identified safety needs to some degree. Some of these plans have developed projects that address specific safety problems. But the Blueprint for Safety will be the first plan in the region to think about roadway safety for all modes of travel, prioritizing improvements that can be implemented starting in the next 5 or 10 years. Destination 2055 is underway now, is producing the next long-range transportation plan. CAMPO has developed draft goals with some directly related to transportation safety. Goal 7, to promote safety, health, and well-being. has an objective to increase safety for roadway users, travelers, and residents. Public comments received at this stage in the planning process have aligned with these goals, expressing needs for improved safety for bicyclists, pedestrians, slowing speed, and using technology to reinforce safer travel. Safety planning asks an important question that is often overlooked in other types of plans. Where the other plans focus on connectivity and mobility, developing projects that address the bottlenecks or gaps in the network, safety plans ask questions about how we will achieve a significant reduction or elimination in deaths and serious injuries on roadways. It is necessary consideration for setting the region's overall priorities and vision for transportation system performance. Other transportations look at the long term. The Blueprint for Safety is looking for ways to eliminate deaths on local and state-owned roadways in the near term and moving forward. A transportation safety plan is unique. It is not a plan that will focus on occupational safety, public safety while these are important stakeholders, or personal security. A transportation safety plan is not purely reactive, looking only at the history of crashes and safety problems. It is also not a plan that is focusing only on certain modes of travel, such as bicyclists or pedestrians, and it is not a plan that will have a quick fix. A transportation safety plan is based on a vision and commitment for improving safety for all roadway users. It is data-driven, and it is stakeholder-led. It is both reactive and proactively looking at ways to address known safety problems as well as identifying risks for future safety problems. It is multimodal, looking at the safety needs for bicyclists, pedestrians, transit users, drivers, and people using all modes of travel. And then it is also a plan that is to focus on both the immediate and the long-term safety problems. The Blueprint for Safety is a transportation safety plan for the Campo region. Now I will introduce the overall planning process. The number one goal is to achieve significant reduction in fatalities and serious injuries on the region's transportation system. Other goals include to inform other regional efforts such as Destination 2055, to increase awareness of transportation safety and risks, to identify needs and recommended safety improvements, to ensure consistency with the Highway Safety Improvement Program and USDOT, and to follow the SAFE system approach. The safety planning process begins by establishing partners, such as with yourselves, to analyze data and input from the community and from many different sources. We use this data and information to determine safety problems and the safety emphasis areas. We develop strategies and projects to address those problems and to identify projects that can be implemented and prioritized based on concerns and interest for both safety in the short term, long term, and considerations for equity. And lastly, we develop this plan to identify also ways that we can continue to monitor success moving forward and to update the plan ongoing. The SAFE system approach is a traffic safety philosophy that is centered on a number of principles, such as those noted around the circle on this graphic. The elements or objectives of the SAFE system approach each inform transportation planning. We ask questions like, how do our plans account for safety of all people using roadways? How do our plans consider size of vehicles moving and the vehicle fleet design? How do our plans call for setting and enforcing safe speeds? And how do our plans account for human mistakes in roadway design? And how do our plans discuss emergency response and human trauma due to crashes? Our schedule is started by convening stakeholders and by beginning data analysis. We'll continue to explore regional traffic safety problems, review regional plans and policies, and develop the plan's overall goals and strategies. Public engagement will occur throughout the process, working with local governments, developing their own safety plans, and meeting with technical stakeholders in each of the counties included in the Campo region, working to develop a draft plan by mid-2025 and adoption by fall 2025. The safety plan will perform considerable data analyses, producing maps and focus crash types. This map is from a recent traffic safety plan for the Burlington-Graham MPO, showing areas high injury network. The list of crash types is from a different safety plan where crashes were most overrepresented at intersections by groups such as older or younger drivers and in other areas. We'll lean on proven safety countermeasures and establish strategies throughout this process. This is a list of engineering countermeasures that are promoted by the Federal Highway Administration as well-researched approaches for reducing traffic crashes. Zooming in on one set of those, for intersections for example, we see treatments such as roundabouts and signal phasing as options we need to consider. CAMPO is the lead agency for the Blueprint for Safety. They and NCDOT provide project oversight, data, technical advisory, advice, and implementation. Local leaders and staff are at the forefront of influencing traffic safety. We will meet with local officials, transportation planners, and traffic engineers to discuss specific opportunities for improving safety, such as implementing safety projects. This is a multidisciplinary effort. We will reach out to and learn from technical advisory teams such as those representing school districts, youth safety programs, emergency medical response, law enforcement, public health agencies, social services, judicial systems, and many others who touch traffic safety. The people who live and work in our region are vitally important to the planning process. We will focus outreach and engagement on people who are most vulnerable to severe traffic crashes, organizations such as major employers who can influence regional travel, and representatives of communities who are historically underserved in traffic safety. Everyone is involved in the traffic safety planning process. We all share responsibility in safe transportation, whether we are walking, biking, driving, or riding. All disciplines and agencies have responsibility in safety transportation, whether we are engineers, planners, educators, first responders, elected leaders, employers, or enforcement agencies. Because people travel roads across the region, it is important for CAMPO to create this framework with all local governments and other safety partners using data-driven methods and sincere public engagement.
So now we'll cover some preliminary data analysis for the CAMPO Blueprint for Safety Action Plan. And first, we'll start off by taking a look at performance measures. So MPOs are unique as well as state DOTs in that they are required to report on 5 Highway Safety Improvement Program safety performance metrics. And you can see those 5 metrics on the right there. So total number of fatalities, total number of serious injuries, and then total number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. And then there are also 2 rate metrics there as well. So you can see the rate of fatalities per vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, and then the total number of serious injuries per VMT. And these targets are based on a 5-year rolling average. They are relevant for the current calendar year, and they're also targets which are established annually. So for the preceding year, CAMPO has to establish what their target is for these 5 metrics. And so if we look at the past performance of these 5 metrics over time for the CAMPO region, definitely see an upward trend in most of these. And you can see the total number of fatalities and serious injury crashes on the left, and then the total rate on the right. But it's also important to note that there was a reporting change in fall of 2016. So you can see that the serious injury definition changed in fall of 2016. And so that does account for some of the difference we see both before 2016 and then after 2016. And then if we look at the non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries, so that includes bicyclists and pedestrians, again, we see this upward trend in the total number, but because that serious injury definition was changed, the upward trend is not entirely related to the performance of the network, but it also includes this administrative change in the definition of a serious injury. So overall, not necessarily the direction we want to see, but there are confounding factors as well. So then I want to cover some overall statistics for the region that I think are really important, providing some context. So we can see here on the left, the total change in vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, for the region for the past decade. And then on the right, we can see the change in vehicle miles traveled since 2020. And so given the long view, we see this considerable increase in VMT over time for the CAMPO region. But even if we just look at since 2020, whereas we all know the pandemic and stay-at-home conditions reduced the number of cars on the road and reduced those vehicles miles traveled, we see a pretty substantial bounce back from 2020 and 2019. And so I believe CAMPO is the fastest growing region in the state in terms of vehicle miles traveled since that low in the pandemic, and Wake County as well as the fastest growing county. So a pretty substantial rebound in the region after those stay-at-home conditions. And that growth is also reflected in the population. So you can see here we've got a population projection from 2020 all the way out to 2050, and it's substantial growth for the region as a whole. And so even though all age groups are projected to grow, the region is also expected to age pretty considerably, with a pretty substantial increase in those 65 and older age cohort. And all these projections are based on the North Carolina state demographers projections, and that's no exception. The state as a whole is expected to age, although the Campo region tends to be a little bit on the young side relative to the state as a whole. And just to sort of underscore that point, that red line that just showed up there on the right, that is the overall state metric for 65 and older. And so you can see that Chatham is substantially older than the statewide metric. And you can see that most of the 65 and older bars for each county tend to be under that statewide average, or pretty close to that average. So then that takes us to crash data. And what I want to do with the crash data is focus on the who, the what, the when, and the where with respect to regional crashes. And so where to start? The what. And that a good place to start with that is the North Carolina Strategic Highway Safety Plan, or SHSP. Every 5 years, the state is responsible for an SHSP update, and as a part of that process, the state determines what types of crashes should be an emphasis for the state for reducing crashes going forward. And this was last updated officially in 2019, but is currently going through an update in 2024, and you can see the emphasis areas from that 2019 plan. So things like lane departure, intersections, younger and older drivers, those types of crash types. And if we look at the region and we compare the total number of crashes, or the proportion that each emphasis area takes with respect to total number of crashes, which is that light green bar, and compare it to the total number of fatal and serious injury crashes, which based on the safe system approach is the emphasis of a safety plan, we can see why some of these were chosen. We can see that, for instance, lane departure there on the left, substantially more fatal and serious injury crashes involve lane departure than total crashes as a whole. So lane departure accounts for about 18% of total crashes, but about 47% of fatal and serious injury crashes in the region. And so you can see how all the SHSP emphasis areas compare for the Campo region. But even when we look at some of the emphasis areas like bikes and peds and motorcyclists, that may be a smaller proportion of total and fatal serious injuries, you can see that motorcyclists and pedestrians account for 1%, about 1% of all crashes, but about 10% of fatal and serious injury crashes. So when those vulnerable road users tend to be in a crash, those crashes tend to be more severe, which is why they tend to be an emphasis area for plans such as this one. And so I'll move on to the where. Some statistics here that I think are really important. You can see the route class there in the top left. Secondary routes tend to be the leader in terms of where you see those fatal and serious injury crashes. And again, as a proportion of the whole, fatal and serious injury crashes tend to occur on secondary routes. If you want to know what a secondary route is, think of sort of like 1010 Road, or those local collector streets that may be 2 lanes, maybe 4 lanes at most. And that's sort of reflected in the other data as well. So you can sort of see the operation there in the middle. Two-way not divided crashes tend to have a greater share of fatal and serious injury crashes than total crashes. And secondary roads will tend to be those two-way not divided roadways. So we see a lot of alignment there. And then urban and rural crashes, and for the purpose of this, urban and rural is defined as the being within a city limits or outside of a city limits. And so again, rural crashes outside of city boundaries tend to be where you see a greater share of those fatal and serious injuries. And then on the far right, I want to direct you to just one small note. So it's a little bit different. You can see that straight and level tends to be the majority of crashes, but this is a totally police reporting officer metric. It's at the discretion of the reporting officer. But what I do want to draw your attention to is those straight but at vertical grade, curve at grade. That's where you tend to see a greater disproportionate share of fatal and serious injuries relative to total crashes. So again, looking at those differences between fatal and serious injuries and total crashes are how we're going to determine when, where, what to look at as we go forward in that plan. And so when, I'll give just a quick overview of this, but you can see by hour of day there on the left. So 0 represents midnight, and then the end of this chart would represent 11:59 p.m. at the end of the day. And you can see a pretty substantial increase in those dark green bars relative to those light green bars. And so crashes, fatal and serious injury crashes, tend to be overrepresented at nighttime conditions where the road might be less congested, speeds might be up, and users of the roadway might be less visible as well. Day of the week, we see a weekend peak for the Campo region. So Saturday and Sunday tend to see an overrepresentation where you see that dark green bar higher than the light green bar. And then you can see the distribution by month there at the bottom right. And then finally, we'll cover the WHO. And so we can see here that crash rates vary by group, whether that be race and ethnicity. So we can see that Black residents in the Campo region tend to have a higher crash rate than that black bar there, which is represented as the statewide crash rate. And then crash rates by age group also vary pretty substantially. And so those 15 to 24-year-olds, those younger drivers, those young road users tend to be disproportionately high as well. And then finally, on the right, you can see a pie chart of the distribution of crash rates by sex. And so males tend to be in a greater share or tend to be the recipient, the injured party in terms of fatal and serious injuries, and they represent about 2/3 of all people killed or injured, seriously injured on Campo roads. And so that's just a quick rundown of the crash statistics, but there will be more to come in this plan.
One of the key components of a safety action plan is really to start thinking about safety culture within our region. And so we want to start by thinking about the what comes to mind with the word culture. We know that this includes habits and brands, lifestyles, traditions, values, attitudes, and practices, and so much more. But along with the what, sometimes we need to back up and say who comes to mind, or maybe who is the ones that are influencing or impacting culture. Most people think about leaders, influencers, marketing agencies, elected officials, ultimately people that have some type of authority within our communities are those that impact culture. And so what do we mean and what is a culture of safety? If we kind of back up with we know that culture is around the beliefs and values and attitudes, and we know that we believe there are certain people that influence it. A culture of safety does include messaging of how we talk about safety and roadway safety within our communities, but it's more than just messaging. It's really connecting people in a positive way that impacts their values, beliefs, and attitudes, and ultimately changes the practices that they have and behaviors on a day-to-day basis. We believe that if we're going to have a positive roadway safety culture within our larger region, that this has to be both a top-down from those that have some type of authority or leadership, but also a bottom-up, that this is everybody's responsibility to be thinking about roadway safety and changing culture. If it's going to be everyone, that there is a shared responsibility to do our part. And then at the core of it is that everyone understands why it is important to make a difference for every user on our roadways and every single trip. Some examples are around youth education, public messaging, whether it's kind of on a social media platform or in other ways when it comes to media. Events such as Slow Streets demonstrating that we care about the way that our streets look and feel for all users. Other types of events where we've kind of elevated the conversation of safety in a way that's meaningful and that people can get involved. Transportation demand management is a tool that can be used to really pull people off of the roadway, even though many people believe that they are absolutely great drivers. The exposure and the risk that is involved with more and more people driving on our roadways inevitably is something that we can avoid if we start to pull some of those trips into different modes. And also an influence on culture is around the way that we speak about crashes and other kind of key things that happen on our roadways. And so not victim blaming, but really starting to think about more objectively about what is happening. There's a lot of key roles that we can talk about with local elected officials adopting policies and funding, planners, designers, and engineers developing plans and standards and really design kind of the implementation piece. NCDOT and Campo, also policymakers, increasing safety, prioritizing projects that really influence safety on our roadways. Law enforcement can share experiences and lead conversations around safety behavior and really document what's happening on our roadways in an effective way. Emergency response, very similar, can be sharing opportunities to improve post-crash care and actually being able to respond, as well as sharing those stories and experiences. And then we're a community or a region of a lot of universities and major institutions, and so they can emphasize roadway safety so that people understand its importance. There are more than just agencies and some of those, and this is kind of from that bottom up. There are parents, teachers, coaches, employers, bus drivers, as well as anyone that you see really does have a responsibility and can take part in promoting a positive culture of safety. There are some things that we sometimes do wrong when it comes to culture and roadway safety is that, one, we just assume that people are unaware or we don't think it's an important conversation, that we accept crashes that just happen, and sometimes that we focus on behavior modification too much, or we focus on roadway design too much. And really it's a combination of all of these things that can increase safety on the roads. Additionally, I wanted to go through engagement and kind of opportunities, starting with some of our goals for this project. First, it's to build project awareness. We believe that we can be strategic in the way that we communicate about safety. This is a start of a really important conversation for our region for years and years and hopefully decades to come. We also want to empower the community, creating partnerships and educating people through this process, the Blueprint for Safety plan, and really kind of think through goals and outcomes with people and not kind of in a silo. We want to gather a lot of input and kind of have representation of what our region looks like that really can guide the plan and have community voice at the center. We want to build partners as well as champions. Hopefully, if you're listening to this, you're one of those, that throughout the region and surrounding jurisdictions, we can be thinking about how to speak with people and receive input in a way that really matters and that we can build support for implementation and what the next steps are going to be. We're going to emphasize equity throughout the process, and this really means that it's not only about how we work through the where and the when for events and engagement, but we want to think through how that process influences recommended actions as well as future outcomes for safety on our roadways. Our equity-based engagement kind of approach really makes sure that if we're going to have an event within any community, we want to be intentional and thoughtful about meeting times and formats, where their locations are, if there are other partnering organizations that we need to be thinking about, and making sure that we use plain language, that materials that are available for people to kind of read or look at, that they're not filled with jargon, hard to understand. And so that's going to be key to making sure that engagement and input is approachable. We have broken our engagement for the Blueprint for Safety plan into 2 phases. We are currently in phase 1, and you can see there's a variety of opportunities. We're going to have a project website. There's going to be an online survey. We have recently had a safety summit. That was a great opportunity for people to come together and provide input. We're going to have technical advisory teams meetings in individual counties across the entire Campo region, and then meet with town board and city council meetings, as well as kind of be part of a variety of public engagement events. We're not doing this in a vacuum. We know there's a lot going on currently when it comes to planning in the region, as well as there's been plans in the past, and we want to leverage those efforts, understand what people have been saying about safety, and use that as feedback that's really valuable for this effort. In phase 2, we're going to be coming to the executive board for this project, having another safety summit to kind of follow up on what we've heard, as well as more of those technical advisory team meetings, as well as town board and city council meetings.